to our 194th Right and Left Discussion Forum. We hold our televised discussions twice monthly to demonstrate the value of civil, productive, open-minded political dialogue. Today, our panel will discuss voting rights and voter suppression, specifically what is a voting right and what is an act of voter suppression. Today's panel begins with Joe Gaines, former faculty member of both the University of Akron and Wadsworth High School. Patty Haskins, former member of the Wadsworth City Council and Wadsworth High School math teacher. Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&D Financial Services, and Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist. Joe, beginning with you, would you give your description of voters' rights?
Well, first off, I like the topic. I got to tell you that. After the Civil War, it was a big move to go back to Jim Crow laws, a lot of places, especially in the South. And a lot of it was to control voter rights because they didn't want certain people to vote. And what was it? 1965, between 1800 or 800 and 1688 polling places affected states were closed. No mention was made in the report about polls closing in other states.
What year was that, Joe?
1965.
65?
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
Let me make this comment. When we think of voter rights, we think of like blacks, we think of, minorities, but we got to remember it's all of us. And it even affects me in a very awkward way as a handicapped person. As handicapped, and that I can't move like I like to. I have Parkinson's. I can't walk. I can't stand up straight, and so on. And because of that, I have to drive to the polling place. I can't get through the mail. I mean, I might not be able to in the future. When I get there, two people have to come out from the polling place to give me a ballot. One's a Democrat, one's a Republican, and they stand there while I vote. I'm not sure I like that. Even if I'm a Democrat, I don't like the Democrat standing there while I'm voting. And then after I sign it and give it back to them, they take it back to the back into the building. Now, for how long have they been out there with me and not doing their job in the building? It creates a problem that way too, not just for me.
You can't do an absentee ballot?
I'll say that again, please.
You can't do an absentee ballot?
No, I haven't. I'm not
You
sure
can,
I can't, but I haven't. No, I think I voted like twice this way, 2 or 3 times anyhow.
But you could, if you wanted to, vote from home with an absentee ballot.
As of now, but if they're going to make changes, and there's talking about changes, would that be
to eliminate the absentee ballot?
What's that?
Somebody wants to eliminate the absentee ballot?
I think so. I think they want to eliminate a lot of things. I mean, I know what I'm going to say. You're not going to like it, but I have to say it.
Go ahead.
I think that our last president really wanted to do things to the point that he didn't want to lose another election. And because of that, he wouldn't say he lost an election. He'd do anything he could to win an election. And if winning an election meant that he'd have to change voting rights and how we ballot, take the ballot and everything, he would. And I think he pushed that. I don't think it worked out very well for him.
Okay, well, we can get into that a little bit later.
Well, voter suppression is an imprecise term that is used to apply to any requirement for any qualification for voting. And they will take away those requirements too, or change them anyhow. Okay, that's about it.
Okay, Joe. Then I'm moving on to Patty.
Hi.
I know this is a topic that's near and dear to your heart.
Yes.
Well, fire away there.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think voting rights should be such that everyone can easily use their right to vote and do so in a normal fashion without extreme hardship. And very honestly, that's the way it is in Ohio, I think. We do have good voting laws that are here right now. Unfortunately, in some states, though, they are trying to change the voting rights under the guise of safety and security. For example, there was just recently, in the past couple of weeks, Lincoln County in Georgia set forth a voting law saying that they were going to change from 7 voting locations within the county down to 1. So in other words, 6 of the 7 would be closed. Now, what that would require then is that many of the residents would have to drive more than 20 miles to go to a voter location. And, that is not making voting easy. That is making it more difficult, especially
if you don't have a car.
Exactly. If you don't have transportation. I mean, there were cases I think it was in 2016, if I'm not mistaken, where there were laws like this that were changed, and they would put the voting location, the new one that was supposedly more efficient, to a place where even buses didn't go, so that people that would normally take a bus to that particular location were unable to do that. Other things that are being done, one big concern is in Georgia, where there are changing basically the certification of the votes, taking it away from the nonpartisan Board of Elections and placing it in the hands of partisan legislatures. And that's not a good idea. And I hope that that does not come to fruition. My big concern, though, is that the polling place is closing. Also, limiting the number of drop boxes or preventing the use of drop boxes, canceling number of days on which you can vote. These can be very suppressive to voters. Now, presently in Ohio, there is House Bill 294 that is before the legislature. One of the co-sponsors is our representative, Sharon Ray. And reading through it, I'm not sure all of the changes were needed. And I've read both sides on them. Some of the good things is they're increasing the auto voter registration and also increasing online absentee ballots. I'm not so sure I'm in favor of that, but that's one of the things that they are increasing. Some of the complaints is that they're limiting the drop boxes, changes in the voter ID, no voting the Monday before election, and shortening the ballot request period for an absentee ballot from 3 days to 10 days. In other words, you have to have the request in 10 days prior to the election. No prepaid postage and the use of the 2 envelope system like they have in Pennsylvania. Now, I actually read Sharon's and her co-sponsors' response to these, and very frankly, they have good response, and I understand some of that. For example, limiting the the absentee voting on that Monday before the election. The reason they're saying they're doing it, and I can understand this, is that it really puts a bind time-wise on the Board of Elections employees, because they have to enter all of the names of all of the people who have voted absentee-wise or voted early into the electronic poll book before the day of election. And if you still have people voting the day before, they could spend their whole evening just trying to enter those names of people that came in at the last minute. I do still have concerns with the drop box rule. What they want to state now is that you can have 3 drop boxes in a county, but only at the Board of Elections. So, adding a couple more at the same location to me does not help people that have to drive a long distance to that location. The other thing that's of concern is they don't require them, so that some counties no longer even have a drop box within their location. I would like to see them add that. They have changes in the voter ID laws, and they say they're confusing, is the complaint, I kind of understand that because I'm not sure exactly how the changes work, but it appears to be so as to make online absentee voting safer. And we don't have that as of yet, but if they put that in, what they've basically done is increase the number of voter IDs that you have to supply in order to vote for verification purposes.
Can you give an example of that? Multiple IDs?
Well, you would have to show, like, for example, you could give your driver's license number, but then you would also, in addition to that, have to give one of the other numbers or a copy of virtually online, like a copy of a utility bill or a bank statement. In addition, in other words, you need to use 2 of the normal voter IDs.
Could you use a social security number?
You cannot use a social security number. You know, that's funny because a social security number is not allowed at the polling place as a method of ID. And the reason is there's no address on your social security card. It just has a number and that's it. The interesting thing though, for many years, when I would vote by going to in-person voting, they allowed me as one of the choices to give the last 4 digits of my social security number as an ID. So it's used one place and not the other.
Yeah.
But there are, and they've actually added the number of things that you can use as an ID. So I understand the point of Sharon and others that say, well, we're not making it harder. We're actually making it just safer when we go to online voting, which I'm okay with that. And they're increasing the number of forms of ID that you can use. The idea of the 2 envelopes, this was actually an issue in Pennsylvania in the last election in 2020.
Okay.
And for an absentee ballot to be considered legit, you had to seal the absentee ballot in an envelope, then take that envelope and put it into another envelope, seal that and mail that in. They say that makes it safer. I really don't understand how that makes anything safer. But what it did do is trip up a lot of people who just thought, gee, I got 2 envelopes, I only need 1. And some ballots were then thrown out because of that, those 2 that were missing. Bigger concern on the national level is changes that could be made so as to not have sets of false electors submitted to Congress in December of 2020. 7 states, Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, New Mexico, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, sent a list of alternate electors. They were all Trump supporters. And these actually ended up in the National Archives. And Congress came out and said, no, you can't do that. And what they wanted then was for Pence to say that, oh, gee, there's confusion here. We've got 2 sets of electors. We're going to have to postpone things. There is a movement, I think, in the U.S. Congress to prevent that from happening by solidifying the actual duties of the vice president upon certification of electors as they come in. I think they're more concerned that this time around it's Kamala Harris is going to be the one certifying the election in 2024. And if this trick is tried again, depending upon the outcome of a particular election, we could see some problems going on there. So all of these things are.
Well, she may be a Supreme Court justice by then.
No way.
Okay, well, I was only joking. Bryan, what are your thoughts?
Something.
I've only worked the polls. I haven't worked the polls as long as Patty, but I did receive a battlefield commission to be the alpha at our location. And that was purely because there was a lack of people. And I accepted it And I went to the training. I even brought my handy precinct election official guide to look up if there were any questions that people had. Of all the people that came to vote, one person came that was not registered. One. And that person was not allowed to vote. And from what I understand with what they tried to do, what they tried to change was they wanted same day registration. And I go back to Patty's very well thought out response is we don't have the people to verify a slug of people that might show up at the polls to vote and register. I mean, there is a series of things and processes that takes place that make, I feel, our voting fair and safe, and also just, it's a slick process that works. And if all of a sudden you say, the last time we had it, we had 9 people showed up to man the location at the library. We had 2 ebooks, and you would think, oh, that would be enough. But those people are there from 5:30 until 9 o'clock at night. And you have to work in lunches and a break here and all that kind of stuff. And you want to make sure that you have your people there when the majority of the voters show up.
Yeah, but don't they get paid a lot of money?
Oh, I'm telling you, wow. I could retire on the amount of money, and I'm sure the people that work at the polls.
How many precincts are at the library, Brian?
I think we have 4.
So Norm, you should have technically 16, no, actually 20 people. And you were doing it with 8 or 9.
Right, 8 or 9. We had 2 books. We had, I believe, 15 voting, maybe 18 voting machines there. Now, we never got swamped. We never had people backed out the door. No one ever waited in line. But some of the things that they want to change just doesn't make logistical sense when it comes to having a free and fair and secure election. I understand that they're talking about, well, people should be able to have food and water. Well, there is a 100-foot rule. And in the election in the presidential election, I was manning the door, and I had to tell people that they had to turn their t-shirt inside out because it was a Trump t-shirt. And I had to tell a lady she had to take her Trump hat off. She was not happy. But the fact is, that's just the way the rules are. I'm a Republican. I'm sure if my Democratic counterpart was working the door and someone showed up with a Joe Biden or bust, they would tell them the same thing. So if someone's there handing out water and that water has a little sticker on it that says, vote for X, that's politicking. You can't do that. And just the notion of people, I understand that some people are waiting in line a long time, but I want the local people, that local board of elections, to have the ability to manage that situation. I don't believe the federal government is going to be able to do a better job than our local board of elections. Now, I have a question. Where's the drop box? I've never used a drop box for my vote. I've voted early before. I've voted absentee before.
That's
but
new. And that came about, those came about more because of COVID in 2020. And,
okay.
primary.
So we currently don't have drop boxes.
No, we do at the Medina County Board of Elections.
At the Board of Elections. So if you want to vote early, you go to the Board of Elections. And
you have to get your it's for if you have an absentee ballot. So you have to get your absentee ballot. And if you're like me and you don't trust putting it in the mail, you can take it to the drop box.
To the drop box. Okay.
One of the conditions in the state bill would be that these have to be monitored, and I think they already are 24 hours, 24/7 by remote camera.
Now back to the point of being suppression. You could look at any of these rules, and we had people come to the polling place. They didn't have the proper ID. It wasn't a driver's license. It wasn't. They basically showed up without anything. And I'm looking here at the rule. The new rule was that voters had to appear at the polling location on the election date. They must announce their full name and current address and provide proof of identity. Now, is that suppression that someone can't, if you can't show up with a utility bill, or you don't have to have a driver's license in Ohio, it has to be something that's acceptable. So the person shows up with nothing, and all of a sudden they're being suppressed. I don't get that.
Weren't they allowed to do a provisional ballot and then have to submit an ID?
Yes,
the
they have.
election?
Yeah, they have 7 days to do that. But then when
They
you
were
start
allowed
talking,
to vote, but with the provisional.
right? But then
Okay.
you have some people that are saying, "Oh, I don't want to go over to that table. I don't want to vote that provisional ballot. I want to go over to that machine and vote." It's like, no, you don't. You don't get to do that. Here's your ballot. It's provisional, and there's a bunch of steps that go with that. So I feel really confident that nobody in Ohio has been suppressed.
But your vote on the provisional ballot, it doesn't get counted for 7 days?
Right.
No, it gets counted. The provisional votes get counted, but you have 7 days to provide ID.
Or it doesn't count?
Right.
Right. They have to be verified first.
It has
before
to be
they count.
verified. It has to be
Okay.
verified. The other thing
Right.
that I really have a problem with is this notion that we're just going to send ballots out to a voter list. And that's one of the things that people confuse. They go, well, what's wrong with mail-in? There's nothing wrong with mail-in absentee balloting like we do in Ohio. Ohio does not send out a ballot to everybody on the registration list. They don't do that. You don't get a ballot in the mail without you requesting it. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a safeguard. The other thing that's troubling at times is the notion that somehow, people just, they can't get to the polling place. We do our best to make sure that it's accepted, that there are people there. Joe's had an experience. I've done that, gone out to a car with my Democratic counterpart. And if the person wants us to back away or turn our backs or whatever, that's fine. But we want to give that person the opportunity to vote. So I don't think we can just keep throwing up these reasons why people can't vote and say that they're being suppressed. I don't see that on the ground here in Ohio.
Ron, you're sitting there with sort of a devilish grin.
Well, I am very concerned and frightened about voter suppression because even though I am privileged, I'm white, I'm above the poverty line, but I'm certainly not wealthy. I'm middle class, and I'm of the male gender. I'm also a Democrat, so I think the GOP is really out to get me because maybe not so much in Ohio, but I just back up some things. Patty already mentioned in Georgia that it's going to be possible for a partisan person to fire a independent elector for no particular reason, just to have a partisan vote on the certification boards. In Texas, following up with Joe, it is illegal now for a person to inform someone that they can apply for an absentee ballot. It's illegal to do that. You can't coach anybody on it. That's suppression. And if business about getting to, limiting drop boxes and so on, all those are happening, and I can understand it. There was a case, I believe it was also Georgia. It was at least a southern state, where there had been a situation where they had a Sunday availability for registration, and people would pick up folks from the black churches after church and take them to register. Well, they closed all those places on Sundays, so that was no longer possible. And people were being taken there who had no other means of transportation other than a bus, which didn't go anywhere close to where the registration place was. So that kind of thing is happening. It's happening all over. What are some things we could do about it? Well, again, I don't really agree that the states should be responsible for their own voting, but in the original John Lewis Act, there had to be a pre-approval, so a filtering by the federal government on changes in voting laws for a number of these southern states, which had a history of discrimination, and that should be put on again. I think, the business that are being done in this, primarily the Republican states, and some of these states have Democratic governors, which with all the big lie going on and all that sort of, we could well lose their places. But I think the legislatures have to be very careful about this. They can bite them in the butt later on. What happens if the state goes Democratic, for example? I have no assurance that Democratic demagogues will not do the same as their Republican counterparts in that state and try to suppress Republican votes. It's certainly quite possible. So I think there are egregious examples out there going on now. Ohio's relatively lucky. I'd like to see, for example, if you lived out in the western wilds of Medina County and didn't have a car, how are you going to get to that drop box? If you can't mail in your ballot, whatever you need to do, it's difficult sometimes. I know a number of folks in my age group that have difficulty getting around. We've talked, I think, before about voting versus informed voting, and that's certainly the ideal. But in the law, we're all entitled to that vote, whether we're informed about it or not. And I don't think we should try to make it more difficult. And that is happening. We're relatively lucky in Ohio, even with the gerrymandering and the problem that they're having, making good maps out of this. And another one just got shot down. So it's happening, folks.
Let's face it. Well, whatever party is in power at whatever level, they're going to try to twist things to their own advantage.
Exactly.
And it always has been that way, and I'm afraid that it always will be. And we are just about out of time, folks. So thank you very much for a good program. We'll have to do this again on voter rights.
I agree.
Yeah.
You too.
Okay.
It's a fluid system.
You are watching WCTV, Wadsworth Community Television.